Welcome back. Still watching Perspective. Thank you for staying with us. We're still talking to Phelim Kine from Human Rights Watch Asia Division. I know it's a bit superfluous when you ask the question, but who is accountable for this?
Who is accountable? Well, the people who are accountable, first off, are the government of Myanmar.
Right.
That is where the problem begins, and that's where the problem has to be addressed in the medium to long term. So essentially what the Myanmar government has done to its friendly neighbors of Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia is outsource the result of their abuses.
Right.
And the fact is that the Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesian government are taking this lying down. They aren't speaking up and speaking tough to the Myanmar government and saying, you need to address your problems at home because your abuses at home have created a regional humanitarian crisis that's going to cost us huge burdens in many ways. So this is something, it's the elephant in the room in addressing this issue.
But wasn't this also the case with the Vietnamese, for example, in the old time?
It's an apples and oranges situation in the sense that in the 70s and 80s, the outflow of boat people from Vietnam were from a communist regime which had no friendly relations with any of its neighbors. So here we have a government, the Myanmar government, which is part of ASEAN, which has friendly bilateral relations with Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, and is just shrugging and leaving this problem to its neighbors. It's unacceptable.
What can it do?
Well,
as a first step, I mean, you don't solve a problem of discrimination of like decades in just a single moment. Are there stages that you see?
Here's the first. I mean, why is this happening? The reason it's happening is that the Myanmar government is getting away with it. It hasn't been pressured adequately to stop this abusive behavior against its ethnic Muslim Rohingya population. So what happens is that Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand needs to make extremely clear to the Myanmar government in concert with ASEAN, say these abuses have to stop. These abuses of universal human rights, you have to stop this. You have to respect the rights of these people, because until you do, we are still going to have these outflows heading into the oceans at great risk to men, women, and children who risk all to try to get to safety in places like Indonesia and Malaysia. So that's the first thing. It's confronting the problem. It's telling the Myanmar government, you can no longer do this. We will not let you get away with this. And so far, that's hardly being mentioned at all.
Well, maybe they're waiting for the end of the year to do so.
Well, unfortunately, for every day that goes by, it compounds the fact that the Myanmar government is getting a free pass on inflicting its internal problems and its abuses of its ethnic minorities on its friendly neighbors.
But yeah, maybe you're right. But for example, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand had a meeting in. Was it in Bangkok?
In Kota Kinabalu.
In Kota Kinabalu recently, and Myanmar didn't even attend it.
Exactly. I mean, Myanmar's attitude toward how its neighbors are struggling to deal with this regional humanitarian crisis is absolutely appalling. And it's equally appalling that the governments of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand aren't confronting the government and saying, you need to step up. You need to take your responsibility here. To a large extent, the government's focus of concern is these boat people who are desperate migrants seeking safety and security that they can't find at home. These people are not to be blamed. Their government is to be blamed because they're essentially pushing them out.
Right. And basically what you're saying is the first, besides the Myanmar is doing their stuff, is for ASEAN to put their feet down and says, look, do something about it.
Sure. Look, there are three levels here. There's bilateral, Indonesia to Myanmar. There's regional, ASEAN, but also the international community, the United States, the European Union, Japan. These are countries that have leverage on the Burmese government. To a large extent, they haven't used it. They have essentially been soft peddling this increasingly abusive situation against the ethnic Rohingya in Myanmar, and which has fed this problem and helped to create the conditions we're dealing with now. So there are multiple players here who can and should get involved and seek to ensure that the problem at home in Myanmar, which is this egregious abuse of the ethnic Muslim Rohingya population, comes to an end.
But what is the reason behind this soft peddling of all these powers? Is it because Myanmar is just opening up, or and they want to see like, okay, let some progress happen first before we actually push all the buttons.
That's a pretty close observation, I think. To a large extent, the international community, particularly the U.S. and the EU and Japan, have bought into this narrative of this Rangoon Spring.
Right.
And in fact, since the initial opening several years ago, the fact is that the human rights and universal rights and freedoms have steadily eroded under this government.
Eroded.
Eroded. It has for ethnic minorities, particularly freedom of the press, freedom of association. Burma is a much less gentle and friendly place than it was several years ago. But unfortunately, the fact is that Burma's closest supporters and donor countries, are still buying into this narrative that we need to give them time. That this is a situation in process. But you can't do that to the detriment of a minority within Burma of 1.3 million people who are essentially being driven out of the country or forced into these squalid internal displacement camps, which is feeding their desperation.
No, and what do you think about the Indonesia, Thailand, and also what is it? Malaysia calls for look, the international community should do something about it in terms of like supporting, also helping, assisting the cost side of it.
The Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand government are absolutely correct and justified in saying, look, we need help with this. This is a regional humanitarian crisis. It requires a regional humanitarian approach, which means that we should have countries like the US, like Japan, like the Philippines, assisting in terms of deploying naval assets, planes, etc., to search and rescue operations, to identify where they are, where these boats are, and helping to bring them in. And once they're there, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand deserve assistance in terms of supporting the survival and the livelihood of these individuals as they await repatriation and relocation. So it's absolutely reasonable that Indonesia should not have to bear this burden on its own.
Yeah, it's been the case with the boat people. I always refer to the boat people because it's more or less the same phenomenon that is happening. And it also didn't take a while. It took like, what, 20 years before the Galang camp was closed? Yeah. Now, that's a long time.
Now keep in mind that the numbers were far higher at that point. It's an apples and oranges situation, but yes, the Indonesian government, probably has some concerns that this could turn into a long-term engagement. And now the thing is, if it does, it needs to be supported with resources to allow that to happen.
Okay, let's break again. Please stay with us.